Morning and or good afternoon, and welcome again to today's Truckload Academy webinar. As Marley just mentioned, I am Kevin Birch, past chairman of TCA and president of Jet Express in Dayton, Ohio. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. On behalf of TCA's chairman, Shepard Dunn, president and CEO of Bestway Express of Vincennes, Indiana, and the rest of the TCA leadership, I want to express my appreciation to you for joining us today. I'd like to thank Cottingham and Butler for sponsoring today's webinar. Their generous support allows us to offer this webinar, and it's being recorded at no charge to our TCA members. Cottingham and Butler's Transportation Group is a leading provider of insurance and risk management solutions and is committed to providing the pinnacle of service and expertise to the transportation industry. They offer a full range of solutions for fleets of any size and provide an array of traditional and non-traditional insurance solutions. Carriers face many challenges in today's market environment, many of them related to the rising costs of just doing business. Today, we are going to discuss the benefits of captive insurance and how it can have a positive impact on your overall business strategy and company bottom line. Our impressive lineup of insurance and trucking professionals is well equipped to help us understand the ins and the outs of captive insurance. Our first speaker is Mark Fitzgerald, Senior Vice President of Captives and Programs for Cottingham and Butler, where his priority is finding value for his clients in group insurance programs. Mark began his insurance career with the Kemper Group back in 1989. He later became a senior underwriter in the transportation field prior to joining Cottingham and Butler in 1994. He has earned many professional designations, including the Associate in Risk Management and the Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter. Following Mark today, we have Dave Franson, Cottingham and Butler's Senior Vice President of Safety and Claims. Dave specializes in risk solutions for the manufacturing industry, having provided services for companies that we all know such as GE, Hormel, Pepsi, Levi Strauss, and Pillsbury. Dave is a board-certified safety professional and has completed the Insurance Institute of America's Associate in Risk Management program. I'm pleased to say following our insurance professionals to share their experience and perspectives as carriers is Carl Bumgardner and Tom Kretzinger Jr. I know both these fellows, and as president of Fleetmaster Express, Inc., Carl Bumgardner is a third-generation trucking company executive and principal. He joined his father in the business back in 1988 and was elected company president in 1997. Under his leadership, annual receipts have increased a whopping 460%. Carl also serves as president of Fleetmaster Express Logistics, Inc., which provides freight brokerage and warehousing services. And in 2012, Fleetmaster Express placed third in the Division III of the TCA National Fleet Safety Contest. Tom Kretzinger Jr. followed in his grandfather and father's footsteps, and in 1981, after passing the bar, he joined the family law firm of Kretzinger and Kretzinger, which specialized in motor carrier law since the early 1930s. In 1998, he joined the family business, America Central Transport, Inc., as general counsel and has served in several roles. Since 2005, he has served as ACT's president. Tom is the immediate past chair, as everyone knows, of Truckload Carriers Association, and has served as the association's treasurer and as a member of the board of trustees of the TCA Scholarship Fund. Tom is a member of the Missouri Bar Association and the Transportation Lawyers Association. Also joining us to moderate during the Q&A breaks is TCA's very familiar Director of Safety and Policy, our own Dave Heller. Thanks again for joining us. It's my pleasure at this time to turn the call over to Mark Fitzgerald. Mark, welcome to Truckload Academy.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Good morning and good afternoon from Dubuque, Iowa. CMB is certainly pleased to be sponsoring this webinar today. on how captive insurance programs can help your trucking company grow. So let's get started. Traditional insurance. Before I launch into this, I do want to say throughout the webinar today, I'm going to be talking about the differences between traditional insurance and captive insurance, and it isn't a dig at traditional insurance. Obviously, traditional insurance serves a very important role. We deal in the traditional insurance industry very heavily, but we've been able to supplement that with captive insurance programs as well that we think for the right trucking company can certainly make a difference in their insurance program. So when we think about traditional insurance, what I'd really like to start out asking you is, how much control do you really have over what you pay for your insurance right now? And my guess is many of you are going to say, not much. There's not much of what I do on a day-to-day basis that really is going to have a significant impact on what my costs are in the traditional insurance marketplace. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that might be. But before we do, we've got a couple of polling questions that I'd like to get to. The first one is, what percentage change to your auto liability insurance rate did you see at your most recent renewal? If you could take a minute and answer this one so we can see the results. We've got some results coming in. Okay, looks like we've got a few still coming in here. We'll close the poll here, take a look at the results. Yeah, so we saw, some, very few had, decreases at their most recent renewal. A majority saw either, no change or an increase of 1% to 10% or more. So interesting on the auto liability side. Now I'd like to do the same thing for workers' compensation. It's argued right now that the work comp line of coverage is where a majority of the problems in the trucking industry are right now. So if you could take a minute to respond to this particular question as well. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll on this question, take a look at the results. And it looks very similar to the auto liability results. So I think that just kind of helps, lay the foundation for the rest of the presentation here, because the traditional marketplace, it's all over as far as increases, decreases, and the reasons for those. Taking a look here at the work comp line specifically, this slide shows you what's happened from a rate standpoint since 2008, the fourth quarter of 2008, for the workers' compensation line of coverage for all of commercial lines insurance. So this is not just pulling out transportation, but looking at the industry as a whole. And one could certainly argue that the transportation exposure is much greater than the average exposure in the commercial marketplace. So you could, therefore say that the increases that we're seeing beginning in the second quarter of 2011, continuing through the first quarter of 2014, have been much greater for the transportation industry as a whole. And that's generally what we have seen as a broker as well. To put that into perspective from a captive standpoint, I wanted to share with you a little bit about what's going on with the captives that we work with anyway. we don't have access to information from other captives, but the captives that we're working with, this gives you an idea of what the members of those captives are seeing in terms of rate change. Going back to 2012, half the membership saw a reduction in their auto liability rate, 40% on their work comp rate. 2013, same thing held true. 2014, it kind of flip-flopped around a little bit. 50% of the membership saw decreases on their workers' compensation line of coverage, 40% on their auto liability line. So this will become more meaningful as we go through the presentation and talk about the differences of the captive model compared to traditional insurance. So traditional insurance, let's talk a little bit about that. The distribution model of traditional insurance is, in my opinion, very inefficient. There are very few direct outlets for transportation risks. Insurance is primarily offered through wholesale markets, and it's not customer driven. So what that means to the trucking company is that there really isn't a primary relationship with your insurance carrier in many instances. And therefore there's not as much focus and attention given to the trucking company as we believe there should be. Lack of stability. In the traditional marketplace, we see insurers coming and going on an annual basis. And oftentimes they're simply competing on price. And when insurance companies clearly are competing based solely on price, it doesn't lead to long-term stability. It leads to insurance companies coming in and leaving the marketplace, as we have seen a lot of in the last couple of years. Differentiation. That tends to be a problem in the traditional insurance marketplace. Often the focus of a traditional market insurance carrier is the need to have to manage their rate, to manage their book of business. To say that, in general, we need an average rate of X amount in order to make a profit. And they spend less time focusing on the characteristics of individual accounts and pricing those accounts accordingly. Safety services. And this is where my friend, Mr. Franzen, is going to step in here in a little bit and talk more specifically about safety and claims. But there's certainly a great divide when it comes to safety services in the traditional marketplace. What we see from most of the traditional carriers providing safety services, and not all of them provide safety services. A lot of the wholesale market insurance programs do not provide any safety services. But when we do see it offered, it tends to be an extension of the underwriting staff. Right? They send somebody out to the trucking company to check boxes, to make sure that they aren't running more than 50 trucks, if that's what they had indicated, to make sure that they aren't doing anything other than what they indicated from an operation standpoint. So safety really doesn't tend to focus on what we believe they should be focusing on, which is making a trucking company a safer one. Claim services. So again, claim services in the traditional marketplace are often geared towards protecting the assets of the insurance company instead of trying to get the best result for the trucking company. And that's very critical in my estimation, because if there's one thing that a trucking company can point to, if they are insured in the traditional marketplace, that's their loss record. And if their loss record is impacted by an insurance company's inability to focus on the details of a particular claim, to pay claims to make them go away, to over-reserve claims in order to make a trucking company's loss runs look worse than they actually are, there's a lot of inattentiveness to claims in the traditional marketplace. Continuity. This is a problem that I think impacts trucking companies more than they realize. It's hard to maintain focus on those things that will impact a trucking company's insurance price over the long term through lack of continuity. A lack of continuity is not having the same partner year after year after year in helping establish safety programming and helping to establish rapport on the claim side with your claims adjusters. That lack of continuity really impacts the trucking companies. So as we get into a captive, what is the definition of a captive? The definition of a captive will certainly range based on the type of captive product that's being offered to a company. The captive products that we work with most often tend to be of the group captive variety. There's certainly other models out there, and we'll talk briefly about some of those, but in the group captive model, the captive is defined really as an insurance company created to insure the risks of its owners. And in the captive models that we work with, the trucking companies are the only owners. There is nobody else with any ownership in the captive whatsoever. And what the owners are basically acknowledging is that losses can certainly be controlled. And that's what Dave's going to talk about. Losses can be controlled, but some are inevitable. They're going to happen. So what you want to do is you want to find the best approach, right, for managing that risk over a period of time. And you also want to find the most effective method in reducing your total cost of risk or your cost of insurance over an extended period of time as well. As I mentioned, there's different types of captive structures that one can look to. There's the single captive parent structure, where that would be a captive that was insuring the risk of no one other than the single owner of the captive. It could be an agency-type captive, and that would be a scenario where, let's say, Cottingham and Butler decided to own a captive, and we took on the underwriting risk of our customers. A rent-a-captive model. That would be a model where someone else owned the captive, but it allowed others to insure their risks through that captive and to share in the results and the profits of that captive. And then the group captive model. And the group captive model tends to be either a collection of risks that are similar in nature, more homogeneous, or that are much different, a heterogeneous type model. The trucking captives that we work with, we view them as more homogeneous because they're all wheels related. They tend to be doing the same type of thing, so we tend to refer to them as homogeneous in nature, but clearly each of the risks is very different.
Where we are is in a group captive, and we're the heterogeneous because we share all of our risks. We all put into one big pot and we all pay out. If we have an accident and it stays within what we've paid in, then we draw out of.
Yeah, that would be correct, Tom. Traffic insurance, which you're a part of, is certainly that type of a model.
Okay.
So why a captive? So the first thing that I always look to is in a captive, you're paying yourself. Right? And when you're paying yourself, you have a completely different attention to the insurance transaction. So I like the idea, and our customers like the idea that they're paying themselves instead of paying that insurance premium to a third party every year. Ability to assume more risk by being in control. We'll talk more about what assuming that risk and control is. Return of underwriting profits and investment income. Right? If we look at the insurance industry as a whole, they're profitable most years, which means that they're making money off of their customers. So in the group captive model, the idea is to bring above average type risks together to keep that insurance company profit, that underwriting profit, and the investment income profit. They get to keep that for themselves instead of turning that over to someone else. Much greater control over claims, much greater focus on safety, and then the reduction in insurance costs over the long term. I will tell you that the insurance premium isn't likely to be significantly less day one. In fact, many of our captive clients have paid more to join the captive because what they're looking at is the long term. They know that the things that they do today are going to have the greatest results and impact on their insurance costs over the long term. There's certainly rewards for reducing losses, in return in the form of the return of dividends or unused premium. The captive is generally able to address coverage availability or administrative issues much more quickly and easily. Greater control over insurance destiny. Right? One of the biggest things that we hear from our traditional insurance customers, right, is the roller coaster nature of the pricing cycle in the traditional marketplace. Right? Back to the ability to control what it is they're paying. And in the captive model, we're able to greatly reduce the impact of the traditional marketplace. So we're able to provide much more stability in the cost of insurance over a long period of time. And one of the things that has really evolved over the last 10 or 15 years as a reason why a captive should be considered is really all the idea sharing and the problem solving that goes on within the memberships of the captive. They're partners, and they talk about how they can reduce insurance premiums, how they can implement different safety programming and ideas with the single goal of getting a better result. What coverages do the captives that we work with tend to look at, and really captives in general for the trucking industry? It tends to be your higher dollar amount items like workers' compensation, auto liability, physical damage. General liability can often be included. We like to see that included with the auto liability when at all possible. The coverages that we don't tend to see a lot and that we don't utilize in the captives that we work with are property-related coverages, like property on buildings, cargo insurance. And the reason for that is each of those coverages really requires a much different limit of insurance from trucking company to trucking company. So there's a much greater exposure associated with those coverages. So you don't tend to see those a lot, and we don't include those in the captives that we work with. Let's take a look at the captive structure. And we're going to, due to the time restraints that we have in this webinar today, we're going to keep the captive structure conversation fairly basic. This could in itself be a 1 or 2 hour presentation on the details of the captive model. But when we take a look at the captive structure, right, the captive itself, or the owners of the captive, the members, they need to decide how much risk they're comfortable with assuming. And in general, a group of trucking companies is able to assume more risk than if they were an individual in the insurance marketplace on their own. What we typically see a captive assume are retentions anywhere from $100,000 up to $500,000 or more. It's really dependent upon the size of the trucking companies, the premium volume of the captive, and the results that the captive has experienced. That will really dictate the amount of risk they want to assume. And above the risk that they want to assume, right, they're going to transfer that to a third party, to a reinsurer. So the captive doesn't have to assume anything more than what it wants to. So how is the captive protected? We're going to start at the bottom of this slide. You see that big bucket down there called loss fund. Well, the loss funds are what's used to pay for claims. And how does the loss fund number get determined? That's determined by an actuary. So an actuary is going to look at all the data. They're going to come up with what's needed for the funding of claims. So at the end of 3 or 4 years, if there's any money left in that loss fund bucket, that's the amount of money that potentially could be returned to the owners of the captive in the form of dividends. Now, we know for certainty that the amount of money put in that loss fund bucket is either going to be too much or too little, right, just by the nature of the estimate that an actuary uses. So if the amount of money in that loss fund bucket is not sufficient to pay for claims, each of the members is going to be held responsible for an additional amount of premium that they might have to pay. You call that an experience adjustment. And the nice thing about the captives that we work with is that every captive owner knows exactly what their maximum experience adjustment might be. We view that as being extremely important. So that allows each and every owner of the captive to know what their maximum potential exposure is for losses. And the reason the captive is able to do that is that top box that says aggregate excess insurance. I call it sleep insurance because it allows the captive owner to sleep at night because they know what their maximum potential exposure is in the captive. For the funding structure within the captive, this kind of further breaks down that loss fund bucket from the previous slide. So that loss fund bucket is broken down into a primary fund and an excess fund. That primary fund there on the bottom, this is commonly referred to as a frequency type layer. This is where a majority of claims that a trucking company is going to have, this is the layer that most of those claims are incurred in. And what we typically see as far as a dollar amount that this layer assumes is somewhere between losses occurring between $1 and $50,000 to $100,000 in size. So losses that are incurred in that layer are paid for out of loss fund dollars that are allocated to the primary fund. Then the excess fund comes into play for those losses above that which the primary fund assumes. And those losses tend to be referred to as more infrequent catastrophic type losses. Those are also losses that your partners might have in this captive model, and this is where the risk sharing takes place. So you might actually have to be called upon to provide some of your loss fund dollars to pay for your partners as well. And then finally at the top, which we've talked about, above the captive's loss fund, what the captive wants to retain, the captive purchases reinsurance because the captive does not want to be exposed to those catastrophic losses above the captive retention. So how captives solve traditional market issues? Number one, adverse selection. The captives select partners with certain characteristics that are needed to be above average risk over the long term. Very critical. You don't get to pick your partners in the traditional market, right? You get to assume the experience that your insurance carrier has. That's what often leads to a lot of the instability of the traditional marketplace. Premiums are determined actuarially. Okay, this is kind of a novel idea, right? You are priced in a captive model based on your experience and the experience of your partners. This drives both accountability and long-term success. Owner involvement. So by having the owner involved in the captive model, it ties everyone to the results. There's much more attention and focus now given to the insurance transaction. Claims and safety. No more underwriting police and no more pocketbook managing. As safety is brought to the forefront and each claim is managed to obtain the best possible result for the captive owner. I view those two things as very critical, and that's why Dave's going to spend some time on that here in a couple of minutes. Rewards. The captive is going to pay dividends back to the owners. Those rewards are tied directly to the results of each owner of the captive. Long-term stability. The operations of the captive don't change based on the market cycle. Again, very important. A captive provides stability, and it's important to maintain continuity if you're going to have success in any insurance program. How captives help trucking companies grow. Number one, lower cost of insurance provides a competitive advantage. That's a big factor for many trucking companies. Improved operations. Hey, this is a hard one to measure, but it provides improved efficiencies through an increased awareness of safety within the organization from the top down. Less time spent shopping insurance. I mean, how inefficient is the traditional market insurance transaction? The countless hours spent gathering data, talking to people, fielding calls, all that's eliminated in the captive model. Dividends, obviously. The return of dividends can be used to hire people, add technology, grow the business. Stability, support. Captive service providers provide regulatory assistance, help monitor, correct performance issues. And then again, as previously mentioned, networking. The ability to talk with peers in a meaningful way has often led to new business ventures, sharing of ideas. How do you do things? How can I improve on what I'm doing? And, at this point, Tom and Carl, I would ask you, I'm giving some thoughts on how I think it helps trucking companies, but have I missed a bullet point or two that you think has been, pertinent to your operations?
This is Tom. I don't think so. I think the networking is very much used. Everybody has the same interest in keeping the total cost down because they benefit from that directly.
You hear me?
Carl? Yeah, any thoughts, Carl?
Yeah. You mentioned it several times throughout your presentation. One real key word that I like is control. We as business owners, obviously like control over our businesses. And in the trucking industry, we have that with our drivers. We have GPS, we have collision avoidance systems, speed governors, etc. And why not apply that to our insurance program? And we feel like a captive offers carriers a better outlet to control the risk management. It gives them program stability, and it lets them get directly involved in claims mitigation, which all goes back to that control word.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carl. And finally, it's the focus. It's the one tool that really brings everything together for the trucking company to help them, do what's needed, from an insurance perspective. And at this point, I'd like to turn things back over to the moderator for a little question and answer session.
Thanks, Mark, for that valuable information. It really was good to know. Before we get into our questions, I'm going to hand it over to Marley so that she can give instructions to our viewers for actually going about the proper way to ask questions or get that information to us. Marley?
Thank you. If you have a question for today's presenters during this Q&A session, click on the Raise Hand tab located at the top left side of your screen. This will let us know that you have a question. When your turn comes up, I will introduce you by the name that was typed in when you logged on and give you instructions on how to open your line. If you're using a speakerphone, please use the handset to ask your question to eliminate any background noise and to make sure that your question is heard clearly. After your question has been answered, click the lower hand tab so we know that your question has been answered. You may also ask a question at any time during the program using the text chat box. To do so, type your question in, which is located at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and then click Send. We will acknowledge receiving your question once it has been received.
Thank you, Marley. And Mark, we do have a couple questions already right here. The first one pertains to cargo insurance. And is there no cargo insurance in the captive is what they want to know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I had addressed this a little bit earlier. there are certainly captive programs out there that do include cargo insurance. We have just chosen not to in the captives that we work with, and the primary reason is that there's such a diverse difference in cargo from trucking company to trucking company, both in the cargo that's being carried as well as the limits that are needed. So for companies to share risk in that, it's often something that they would prefer not to do.
Fair enough, fair enough. Another question is what are the overhead cost implications and differences between single-parent agency captives or group captives? Can you explain some of those?
Sure. The overhead piece, I would say for a single-parent captive compared to a group captive, it's going to be fairly similar. The differences are really going to lie in the premium base that you have to spread those costs out over. So you aren't going to see a big difference in the operational costs of a single parent to a group captive or even an agency captive. Those costs tend to be the same.
Thanks, Mark. Finally, and one last question, actually, to get us back on track and time-wise. What are some of the current trends you're seeing in the traditional marketplace out there right now?
Well, the trends, we saw earlier on the work comp side, kind of what's going on in that marketplace. We're seeing a lot of companies exit the market, and that really adds to the volatility. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of trucking companies are migrating towards captives, because it provides them that stability that they're not getting in the traditional marketplace right now. So that's certainly a trend that we're seeing. We expect it to continue. And one of the things that's often not talked about is that as more trucking companies migrate from the traditional market to captives or something that's alternative, it leaves a less desirable risk pool in the traditional marketplace. And that's bound to have an impact on the traditional marketplace as we move forward.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. And as I mentioned earlier, we do want to get back on track time-wise. So for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, we'll hope to get them in the second part of this webinar. And again, at this point, I do want to turn it over to our next speaker. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, Mark alluded in a number of occasions to the importance of safety and claims to the success of the captive members. If you look at our clients over the last 20-some years in the captive world, and those that have had the most financial success really bring two things to the table and look to enhance both of those as part of the membership. And that's a senior-level management commitment to safety and also willing to be involved in the claims process. And time again, those two characteristics of a fleet have proven valuable from a financial standpoint to our members. So let's jump into this. Obviously, the safety aspect of the captive is looking to prevent an occurrence or an injury, and obviously the claims is then to pick up the pieces. And what we bring to the table from a captive modeling standpoint is really a four-bucket service plan on the safety piece. The model that we're going to talk about was really constructed by the various members over the past 20 years, and we've had a lot of success with this model. First bucket, we talk about our on-site consultation, and in each of these bullet points we'll talk to in greater detail. But the on-site consultation is a consultant showing up on your doorstep, conducting a gap analysis, doing risk control workshops, conducting leadership and safety courses, but really trying to assist that customer in identifying strengths and weaknesses in their program and moving the ball forward. That said, you can have the greatest consultant in the world. At the end of the day, as a carrier, you have to own your safety process on a day-to-day basis. So we've spent considerable amount of time and resources developing a professional development series to support our members in the various captives. We have risk control seminars, safety webinars, NATME designations, things to help that customer increase the knowledge base and the resources that they have within their facilities. Bucket number 3, safety communication and employee involvement. I've been in the safety game for over 30 years now. Lost a lot of hair during that time. But our customers who do really, really well from a loss standpoint year after year have a very strong safety communication model, and they've got their employees involved in the safety process. In the transportation world, these are two challenges based upon how the work is performed away from a standard location. So in our captive models, we've developed a series of tools to assist the fleets in augmenting the safety message and keeping that safety culture running on a daily basis. And finally, within the captive, we have an accountability process. It's called our scorecard, and this is done with each of the captives on a semi-annual basis, and we'll talk specifically about this. In my opinion, having been involved with captives over the last 20-some years, this has been the driving force for continuous improvement. So if you're a motor carrier out there that's looking to improve your processes and programs, we get to this piece, the performance metrics have been paid huge dividends for our customers. So that safety gap analysis, let's talk a little bit about the on-site consultation. As I mentioned, with our experience with over 200 some odd fleets throughout the country, we've identified 4 critical areas that we know are going to lead to superior losses. The vast majority of those have nothing to do with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, OSHA, or any other regulatory body. It's really about management support and leadership. And so our gap analysis tool is really to help that particular owner identify weaknesses in their program and how they can leverage their ability to impact their organization. If you look at the scoring of our tool here, it's a scored assessment that comes out, and it's actually weighted. You know, we've identified certain criteria within a fleet that contributes contributes to the likelihood of an accident or an injury. You look at driver selection, driver accountability, management leadership. Those are critical tasks that we're looking for. And the advantage from a business owner's standpoint is you have an action plan very specific as to what's going to be done over the next year with your particular fleet to drive performance. And the other thing we have with a number of our captive members, they're now using this scored audit tool as an accountability system. It's a great way to measure your safety department, your maintenance department, and your operational staff as far as how they're performing from a safety standpoint. So it gives an executive line of sight very, very quick to where they stand compared to their peers in the industry. The other on-site consultation tool that we use quite a bit is what we call our RIP, which does not stand for rest in peace, but rather stands for our risk improvement process. And what this is think of a claim review in reverse. This is a safety consultant coming in after he's looked at your processes and programs through the gap analysis. Now he's going to start drilling down into individual losses with you and really trying to carve out corrective action. And many fleets struggle with this, particularly in the workers' compensation side. You know, those driver falls, the strains and sprains. Many times we'll see corrective action that tells the driver to be more careful next time. And I think anyone who's fallen out of the cab of a truck knows what's going to happen, so they correct themselves. So we're looking to help our customers expand that corrective action base out beyond telling the employee to be more careful. So it's been a great tool to help identify accident causes and really root cause solutions to prevent a reoccurrence. Bucket number 3 we talked about earlier was professional development. At the end of the day, your staff's got to run the play. So how do we help you make sure that you've got the best resources in-house? The captives, you know, Mark had mentioned and Tom had mentioned about networking earlier. We have semi-annual risk control workshops in which safety directors and claims professionals are invited on site for 2 days. And at those work sites, they're listening to attorneys, they're listening to claims people, they're listening to safety consultants and providing ideas on how to improve their safety process when they return home. Sharing of best ideas and best practices and also networking with their peers has been a huge plus for our various captive members. And we also supplement that professional development with our webinar series. We do a monthly webinar, and that could range anywhere from compliance-based issues to developing a safety culture and really that whole leadership and safety. And how do you make that happen within your facility? Communication tools. You know, everyone's a little bit different in this area between online, in-person training, sending out information electronically. What we provide to the membership here is a number of tools to help reduce their development time. So if they can implement that, we're going to develop the tools that they can go use with their fleet, and this could be safety brakes, accident countermeasures, and our customers will actually, at many times, they'll actually ask us to profile a specific accident that they've been involved with, develop corrective action, so they can actually share that information then with their fleet. And we found these to be very effective, much better than the generic video that tells your driver to maintain a 3 and 9 hand position on the steering wheel. These are very specific, and a senior driver gets a lot out of analyzing a prior accident. And then finally, on the safety piece from a captive, this is bucket number 4. And like I said, to me, this is the most critical tool that we have out there. This is our safety performance scorecard. This is a sample. We have 9 performance metrics that we look at with the customers, and this comes out on an annual basis. So starting from the far left here, we've got the member scorecard number, no member names. Then I've got the safety gap analysis tool and how they scored, and then the next category here is their ranking among their peers within the captives. So my top line here, what we call our leading indicators, my gap analysis, my CSA values in 3 different categories: unsafe driving, hours of service, and vehicle maintenance. And everyone, once again, like I said, is scored compared to their peers. And then down along the bottom line here, we have what we call our lagging indicators. Things that when you look back at your history, you can say, okay, what's the likelihood we're going to have another occurrence? Workers' compensation lag time, to me, when we talk about the claims, probably the most difficult thing to control from a transportation standpoint. Getting that claim turned in early definitely helps you out. So we monitor lag time, 3-year loss ratio, AL loss rate. This would be a fleet's accident cost per mile, and then workers' compensation cost per mile. Then the last bucket is risk sharing, and what percentage of premium was shared among the other members. At the end of the day, we have a final ranking. Within all of our captives, we use the performance scorecard for 2 purposes. One is to recognize and reward those that are top performers, and then the other portion of this is our continuous improvement process. The bottom 10% of the membership in any of these categories is required to respond with an action plan to the full membership on what they're going to do to improve their fleet. Like I said, this has been the sticking point on the, not the sticking point, this has been a tool that has really helped us create a culture within the organization as a whole when you look at the captives to drive continuous improvement. Now, let's take a look at the claims piece. A lot of differences here in the captive world versus the standard market. Based upon our experience over the last 30 years in the TPA business and specifically since 1993 in the captive world, we put together a number of processes and programs specific to transportation to help drive down the ultimate cost of a claim. With this, if you look at the captive advantages that are brought to the table, I've kind of done an outline form of what we see as the big differentiators. In this first category, claim reporting. Think about a driver of yours that middle of Timbuktu, Christmas Eve, and they're involved in a mishap. In the standard market, you go to call that claim in and get assistance, good luck. Many times you're getting an answering machine or we'll talk to you after the holidays. Within the captive model, you've got an experienced adjuster who's ready with a response team to include attorneys and accident reconstructionists 24/7, 365. So to me, this is a necessity in the transportation world. The assignment, if you look at the assignment, a lot of people don't realize in the standard market, your adjusters are staggered and they're tiered. On the workers' compensation model, you've got medical-only adjusters, indemnity adjusters, and subrogation adjusters that may all work one claim. In our captive model, you have one adjuster. They're an experienced indemnity adjuster, and we think that's critical. If you look at the creep in medical claims, why would I have a medical-only clerk processing bills on your behalf? Why wouldn't I want an experienced indemnity adjuster looking at every specific claim, every specific bill that comes in to make sure I don't get into injury creep, where a driver initially starts with an elbow injury and it ends up into his shoulder, into his lower back. Our experienced adjusters are able to squeeze down those soft tissue claims. Staff turnover, the industry runs about 20% staff turnover with adjusters. We're at 3%, brings a lot of continuity. Back to Mark's point on stability within the model. Claim reviews, you've got that one adjuster per line of coverage, makes that much more efficient process. And probably these last two items are the two biggest things. Carl had mentioned control of your claims. I don't know how many times you've been involved with a claim and you can't quite understand what the reserve is. In the captive model, everything is based upon the facts. You are part of that discussion, and the adjuster justifies to you why the reserve is set and the reason for that. And also from a settlement standpoint, within the captive model, you are going to hear about the settlement. They're going to talk to you. It's your dollars. So before a settlement is made, your adjuster is going to contact you, tell you where you're at, and so there'll be no surprises. Versus the standard market, many times you look at a reserve, you have no idea why it was jumped $100,000, and you see a settlement that was made, and you're like, boy, I'd like to have set the tone with that employee and made him jump through some hoops because I know he's going to talk to the rest of my employees. I wanted to be a little more aggressive. You're not going to get that with an insurance carrier. You would definitely get that in the captive model. Creating alignment. I don't know how many of you in the standard market get to rate out your adjusters and tell them whether they're good, bad, or ugly. In the captive world, 25% of my adjusters' annual review is going to be based upon what you say about them. So annually, each of the members is asked to conduct a satisfaction survey. In my annual performance appraisal for all of our adjusters, this is 25% of their annual review. The other key differentiator you'll find in the captive model is our technology piece. Everything is transparent. Everything's transparent. So each member has the ability to get on the website, set up dashboards for the different members, and they can look at any particular piece of information regarding that claim. They can see the adjuster's notes, what they're working on. Within the system, they can even email the adjuster as they're looking at a claim to say, hey, I've got a question on this particular piece. Can you tell me where we're at from a litigation standpoint, let's say? So everything is very, very transparent. All the information is there. And there's a variety of tools. It's a very powerful system. So not only can I understand the financials and the drill down on any specific claim, from a safety perspective, and I think this is huge, I can go in here and I can craft over 2,000 different reports. We've identified 56 different reports that come out as a standard package to our fleets. And to me, this helps give your safety program direction. You can identify your trends and analysis. If you've got multiple locations, you can do a rating system on each of those. So it provides a lot of insight to a safety process as to where you're going. All right. Before we finish up this section, I'm going to turn this back over to Mark Fitzgerald just to kind of recap the CBCS piece of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Last couple of slides here before we get into the next question and answer session. Just give some thought around, captives. And maybe you haven't been exposed to a captive. Maybe you have. But there are some reasons why a captive can be a competitive advantage. But oftentimes there's things standing in your way. And one of those things tends to be brokers. Brokers in the traditional marketplace will make somewhere between 10 and 15% of the premium that you pay for insurance. In the captive model, it is significantly less. It's in the 4 to 6% range. So oftentimes brokers don't have the financial incentive, right, to recommend to their customers that a captive may be the best way for them to go. And secondly, the broker's role really becomes more focused on safety and claims and less on shopping. So if a broker doesn't really have the ability to help you from a claims and safety standpoint, they want to continue to shop your insurance and send it to 10 or 15 different markets every year and show that they're doing a good job saving you money. Well, at the end of the day, they're probably not saving you money if their only role is shopping your insurance. And then there are still a lot of brokers out there that just aren't familiar enough with captives or don't have access to a captive in order to bring that to their customers. And then finally, just take a minute and think, is a captive right for your company? Right? And some things have to be in place in order for a captive to be right. Does your company have a favorable loss history? In the captive model, your premium is going to be based on your losses. Is your company financially sound? You're taking risk in a captive. You're sharing risk with partners. So you have to have a solid financial statement. Is safety a top priority? With top priority meaning top down, right? Is top management going to take the safety reins and really drive the process? And then, are you willing to take calculated risks and bet on yourself? An old, famous quote by Albert Einstein, which I think applies very, very nicely to the captive model, is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's where the captive model blows that quote up. We do it differently. We are looking for different results, and it's been a great success. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to the moderator for another question and answer session.
That's one of my favorite quotes. I use that all the time, by the way. Usually I'm speaking to my 8-year-old son.
That works too.
Thanks, guys. Again, I appreciate invaluable information right there. Again, it is back to a Q&A time, and you all know how to ask some questions, and we've got some coming in the pipe already. Guys, here's a question that just came in. If we already own a single-owner captive, A&L P&D, how do I measure or compare sticking with what I have as to joining a group?
Well, that's a great question, and it would really boil down to taking a look at all the different pieces, of the two captives. We could line up side by side, the amount of risk that's being taken in the single parent captive compared to the amount of risk taken in the group. We can line up operational costs of the single parent, how they match up to those in a group. So, we've done those types of things in the past for both other captives and for traditional marketplace. It's the same model, same comparison tool. So, we'd be happy to help you with that, but it's really just a side-by-side comparison because all captives tend to have the same operational components.
Fantastic. The next one came in is, how can I be sure that every member admitted to the program has a clean loss record and an ongoing commitment to safety?
Another great question. The beauty of the captive model, and Carl and Tom may want to chime in here as well, but the owners actually get to decide who joins them as partners. So, the front-end underwriting is done by the broker. The broker knows what they should be targeting, and they bring those types of quality companies to the owners for review. And it's up to the owners to say, yes, we'd like to have them as a partner, or no, we don't.
Yes, Mark, we actually have an underwriting committee that looks at those submissions, gets information from our fronting insurer and also Cottingham and Butler, and makes decisions whether or not we want to pursue the risk.
Thanks, Carl.
Risk assessment.
I don't have any more questions, and obviously at this point we're going to, on the interest of saving time, we're going to move back over to our member stories, and I'm going to hand it back over to Carl and Tom. Carl?
Yes, thank you, and I want to thank the TCA and CMB for having me on this panel, and good afternoon, everybody. A little bit about my company. Founded in 1987, so that makes us about 27 years old. The last 15 years we've been in a captive, so we have some good experience there, over half of our life. Our corporate offices are located in Roanoke, Virginia. We are a 100% company-owned power with 100% dry van operations. Our services include mostly truckload transportation. 80% of that being beverage or beverage-related commodities such as beer, soft drinks, water, cans, and bottles. We do have some dedicated operations, also some spotting and yard management contracts, some warehousing in about 3 states, and also third-party freight brokerage logistics. Our service area is East Coast, Albany, New York to Tampa, Florida, then west to Arkansas, and we're pretty heavy in Ohio and Indiana, and do have a couple dedicated operations outside that footprint in Texas and Wisconsin. Why we got into the captive, we joined in 2000, but prior to that we were with Liberty Mutual for about 5 years. The first 3 years of that, they offered very attractive rates. We were also involved in a workers' comp dividend program, which we prospered on that. And then in 1998, our agent came to us and informed us of a hardening of the reinsurance market. And for that, he had to go outside of Liberty Mutual paper to get our umbrella. And also at that time, the dividend was no longer offered as well. Then at our 1999 renewal, obviously rates also continued to climb. Liberty Mutual was offering some non-renewals on some of their accounts and even doubling some premiums at that time. And it was obvious that they were selectively exiting the marketplace. And that's when we got interested in the captive concept. So over the next year, we talked with Cottingham and Butler, and in 2000, we had a renewal from Liberty Mutual, and we also had a quote from the captive. And the traditional market is as Mark calls it, being Liberty Mutual, their quote was virtually the same as our captive quote, except there was one exception that we had to look at, was this dividend potential. And that was the original draw to the captive, was this equity building model. So I look at it as sort of like rent versus mortgage. Rent being your traditional market where you pay your premium and it's gone. There's no recapture. Versus in the captive membership, you have your operational costs minus your claims, and what's left over is your potential equity that you build in your program. An important factor to consider is at that time, and Mark mentioned this, or Dave, I believe, mentioned it, that we did have a top-down commitment to safety. We felt that we had a very good program, and all the people that are out there listening today, it's very crucial, I think, that the attribute you have is to possess a very, before entering a captive, is have this top-down commitment to safety. And that's why we were comfortable diving into the program. What we didn't know is what we didn't know. If the equity model got us there, once we entered the captive, we were very pleasantly inundated with safety services and claims management like we never really experienced from any other service provider. And that's really what kept us there, and it made us better. And the reason being is you should realize that this is your money on the line. You're dealing with your real dollars. And you look at claims and risk in a total different light when you're facing that model. Dave mentioned it, and some of the things that we're very pleased to be involved with are the biannual safety workshops where we send our safety directors and some of our HR people come back with a lot of great ideas. Safety assessment audit, we do that each year. It's basically a mock DOT audit, and then there's scoring, which should put you up against your peers within the captive, and that tends to make you get a competitive nature about improving your safety program. There's the biannual director and shareholders meetings, which I'll talk a little bit about that in a few seconds. But the quarterly liability and work comp claims reviews are very crucial. Our two representatives that we have for liability and work comp, we've worked with those people now for over 10 years. We know them personally, met them face-to-face, and we have these reviews, and they listen to our input. And mostly they understand the concept that this is your money, and they take it personal. So of all those things, it's over 10 times a year where your company interacts with the captive or its service providers as well as other captive members in some instances. And going back to the directors' meetings, I think it was mentioned in the webinar is that control that we talked about. Each member has a director involved that helps in developing the captive's bylaws and other program decision making. And there's no surprises about what's going on in your program. You're on the bottom level, and we find that very important. And so, in conclusion, our experience has been very positive with the captive. It's provided a stable program. It's helped us to remain competitive in our industry. Our service providers have offered continuous process improvement and ideas. And also, we've made a lot of friends and contacts within our membership. This webinar is about growing your business. Our business, when we entered the captive in 2000, we were doing about $20 million in receipts, and this year we'll do about 75. So the captive has been able to grow with us as well as helping us grow. We also made an acquisition the first of this year, which we were able to bring that company into the captive, and by getting them involved in our insurance program, it helped make that deal possible. So with all that being said again, very, very good experience, and I hope I've given you some good insight, and I'm looking forward to any questions.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate it. I know everybody on the line appreciates it. So at this point, we're going to get some insight from Tom, and then we'll get some questions in there, okay? Tom?
Yes, good morning. I'll tell you a little bit first about ACT. We're based in Liberty, which is a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. We're 300 trucks, dry van carrier. Operating territory is the Midwest. We're pretty much east of central Kansas, except for the northeastern Florida. We're about 2/3 owner-operator. Most of those come through a lease purchase program, but not all. We've been in the captive since September of 2001. Prior to that, our experience was much like Carl described. We'd been in the traditional markets with a big-name carrier. And I think I'd been out of practicing law 3 years when we first went into the captive. But we saw very much a similar experience. The markets were hardening. It sure seems like there was a lot more variation back then than what we've seen lately, but we're seeing radical changes in insurance costs. So we decided to, in 2001, to bid out our business. And one of them was the captive we're in. The way we went about it, and it was probably a little too crowded, but we got 4 agents and we split up the markets. They all were assigned certain markets and had them all come in and make their pitch and bring in their numbers. When all the smoke cleared, the actual pay into the captive was substantially less than what we saw from the market during that time. We were told at the time, and we've seen it bore out over the years, that in a captive program you see much less fluctuation than you do on the markets. I think one bid we had was actually double what we saw from the captives. Our incumbent insurance company was $300,000 more. And just like Carl described, this company at that time was exiting the market, keeping a few select customers. And you do see this from time to time as markets change. You'll see, times where maybe the stock market's good or interest rates are high, everybody wants to get into it. And they get into it and they offer cheap premiums or to attract business. And then a few years down the road, the chickens come home to roost. So you start seeing what claims are. Maybe the market's not that good, and they either exit or now they're suddenly, charging a whole lot of money. We've never seen that in the captive. What was the hard part about getting into a captive? We did swallow hard when we went into it. We were told, and I think honestly so at the time, that this is not something you get into with the idea of jumping around every year to something else. And I would say that we found that to be true. For one, you have to secure your obligations, either with a letter of credit or putting up cash. And claims, take a few years to mature and get to a point where you really know what they're worth. Well, if you leave the captive, you're not going to get your security back right away. It's going to take some time for those claims to develop and for that to be paid back. And that was important to us because you think about what was going on in September of 2001 when we did join. We had 9/11. The economy wasn't good. There was a lot of uncertainty, and the notion of putting up a bunch of money or putting up a bunch of money to go letter of credit, that was a jump for us. It has not been since. It's been, I think we originally put up a letter of credit. Over time, when we were flush, we've replaced that with cash, and the earnings we see on our money have been very good. Claims handling. There was some talk about the quality of claims handling, and that is really true. I'll tell you a little story. After we got in the captive, we had a claim that went back to our prior insurance company that I referred to. And it was a wreck up in a snowstorm in Iowa. The liability was questionable, and I think the damages were frivolous. It was a questionable liability and not much in the way of damage. This case has been going on a while. I get a call from a lawyer up in Iowa that the insurance company had hired. He says, yeah, we're going to mediation Monday, and I'd like to get $500,000 authority to settle. And I thought, what? For this claim? And he hadn't had much communication with me. And I was still fairly fresh from the law office. And back in my day, they didn't pay you on a claim unless you picked a jury or tried a case. Now, everything's mediated. But back then, mediation was kind of new, so I was surprised. And so I started asking him what the evidence was. And he said, well, their doctor says this, and this is wrong with her. And they've got a vocational rehab guy that says she's lost all these wages. I said, okay, what does our expert say? And the answer was, well, we didn't get one. I said, you didn't get one? How are you going to rebut what they said without an expert? I said, go get one. Well, the time for discovery is closed. So I'm sitting here, I'm just now becoming acquainted with this claim for the first time, and I can already see it's a mess. So I called the adjuster on the claim. This was a kid who probably hadn't been in the business a year, and it had the file on his desk for about 2 days. And all he's saying is, I'm not paying anything. So I tell you that story as kind of an example of what you can see with mismanaged claims. I can confirm for you that with the captive we're in, what they've said is true. You have a lot more control over your claims. You know what's going on. I've even suggested attorneys to be assigned to represent us in some cases, because I know a lot of them. I'm on the ATA Litigation Center. I know a lot of those guys. And then the Transportation Lawyer Association. And, you know, if the guy's qualified, yeah, they've put him on. It's been pretty good. I do think it is important today that when you have a claim, especially one that could be serious, that you get on it right now. Get the accident construction people onto the scene, get the lawyers on the scene. You want to get this case put together before the potential plaintiff hires a lawyer. And I found that the claim services they do at the captive are real good on that. And so a lot of times that can make the difference of several $100,000 in what a claim ends up settling for. At the end of the day, we did decide to go with the captive, and we put up the money, and we've been in it ever since. And I'm not one who believes in jumping around insurance companies a lot. I think that can hurt you because the underwriters will see what you do. But I do believe in testing the market periodically, and we have done that. Not every year, but every 2 or 3 years. And every single year since we joined, the captive has been better than the market. In fact, I've had a couple agents that are good friends of mine just tell me it's not worth my time to bid if you're in the captive. I can't touch that. The other uncertainty is when you go to the commercial market and you buy a policy, you pay an amount, that's a premium, and that's what it is. Here you pay in the premium, you deduct it as a premium, but it could go up or it could have money coming back to you depending on how you do. So that's the risk side of it. We have a good safety record, and I would say since we've been in it, with the exception of 1 quarter, we had an assessment in the A Fund. Every year we've gotten money back. So as it's turned out, when you're looking at, for us, the money that's paid in, it's not apples to apples because we have a history of getting money back. Of course, with the markets, that won't happen. So we've been real happy with the whole thing. It's been very good for our company. One other thing I'd like to mention about the captive that I particularly like. You know, there's been an issue going around the industry on how much insurance you should buy. And I'm one that tends to believe that should be the business decision of the company buying insurance. However, as a lawyer, I also know that $1 million is not enough. If you are carrying $1 million, you better be broke because you are bare. You know, we want to buy enough insurance to protect ourselves. Average verdict or settlement for in the country for wrongful death for one person is $4 million. And what's your odds of, in a bad wreck, having more than one in that car? If you have even worse, there's worse things than killing somebody. The worst is someone has brain damage and they need 24/7 care for the rest of their life. Depending on how old they are in their career, that's about a $12 million bill for one person. So you can quickly see that millions kind of taking a risk. People will say, well, they always take whatever insurance you have. Well, that used to be true. That's not so much true anymore. They'll want your balance sheet. They'll allege punitive damages. So we've bought more than $1 million for a long time, but a few years ago, the captive that we're in went from offering $1 million to $2 million with the same company, and that was not only nice, but the price also beat the market. Now they'll offer up to $5 million. So for me to get up to $5 million, I'm dealing with one company, people I know, people that have treated me fairly, people that cover contractual risk. And as you buy umbrella insurance, what you find is it's a limited number of players, and they each like a different layer. Well, one thing you have to worry about when you're dealing with several companies is the question, does each policy cover the same thing? And the other thing you get into is if you have a bad fight, these insurance companies will start fighting with each other. And so there's definitely an advantage to having the first 5 in one place with people that are good, and then I just have to worry about layers above that. And the first 5 is the most expensive thing because that's where it gets penetrated. So anyway, that's some of our thoughts on how we do it. We have good safety. We have become better since we've been in the captive through these audits and responding to those. And it's definitely something worth looking at for your company.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Carl. And from my point of view, I know both of your safety directors, and I can say they are top-notch. We do have a couple questions in here already, and at this point, we'll get to those. The first one is, and Tom, Carl, what happens in your captive group? Say there's a really bad accident. It's in the $10 to $20 million range. What happens then?
Well, knock on wood, we haven't had that, but your primary defense is going to be the captive. If you really think it's over that, you're going to want to notify your excess other insurers if you have them. If you don't have them, that always gets to be touchy because say you think it's a bogus case, but the way juries are, you may not want to roll the dice and see that it goes over your coverage. I don't think personally 5's enough. I don't know what the number is that's enough anymore. It gets worse every year, but they do a good job of defending you in the bad case.
And I might add to that, Tom, that in the captive itself, right, the policies that's issued that the captive might be potentially be responsible for, it's a $1 million policy. And in the captive that Tom and Carl are part of, their captive assumes the first $400,000 of any one accident. So regardless of the size of the claim, $10 million claim, $20 million claim, the most that the captive will ever have to pay is $400,000. So the captive, buys that reinsurance protection because it doesn't want to assume anything more than $400,000 in any one loss.
Fair point. Mark, Dave, a question for you guys is, have you ever had a captive fail or seen other captives fail? What happens?
Fortunately, we have not been a part of a captive that has not been successful or that has failed. All the captives that we work with have thrived. We have seen some captives that have not made it, and the two reasons I think you could primarily point to is you didn't have the right providers, right? There wasn't the right focus on the type of business that needed to be written. And another example of one that I know that failed, they took on losses that they weren't anticipating. So you have to make sure you have the right business plan in the captive, and that you're assuming only that type of risk that you expect to assume.
How do y'all select participating companies in the captive?
Carl kind of touched on that one a little bit earlier, but it's a pretty rigorous process. It often takes 60 to 90 days to get through the entire process, but it starts with collecting data to make sure that we have somebody that would be a good fit. If we think they would be a good fit, then the first thing we do is we send our safety team out. So somebody from Dave's staff will go out and personally inspect an account, and they will come back and provide a lot of subjective type commentary on, I think the management will be receptive to change. I think they're doing a lot of the right things, and we can continue to build on that platform. So it's not a scoring model or anything that we use to say somebody fits or they don't fit. And then if they get past that point, they go to the actuary for pricing to be done, and then it goes to the actual underwriter for the reinsurance company or the carrier that's issuing the policies. They'll do their review work and give it the yay or nay, and then finally it goes back to the membership for them to give their stamp of approval on any new potential partner.
Well, thank you very much. And folks, that's all the time for questions we do have today. If there were any text questions or questions that didn't get answered, I assure you we'll get answers for you and get them back to you. Before we do close, I wanted to give our speakers the opportunity to share any closing thoughts they might have about our topic. Mark, I'm going to start with you. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, I would just, say to those trucking companies out there that have listened to this today that you should look at the captive model. It may not be right for you today, but it might be right for you tomorrow. And the more you can learn about it and understand about it, the more informed a decision you can make, and the more comfortable you'll be, in reviewing and talking about captives.
Dave, anything you wanted to share?
Just to reemphasize, the captive membership, and if you're looking to join that strong commitment to safety, the involvement in the claims process, can lead to a lot of success financially for a trucking firm.
I can't echo those sentiments enough. Carl, how about yourself?
I think this is all very good information. I endorse it all. I wish that I had something like this to look at, before we were looking at captives. It makes things a lot clearer. And for the trucking companies that are out there listening today, if you're not already in a captive, considering being in a captive, I hope that you'll consider it. Call C&B, because we're always looking for good partners in our captives.
Fantastic. Mr. Kretzinger, how about you?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think we're in a business now that you need all the knowledge and information that you can get to get all the arrows in your quiver to figure things out. And I'd encourage you to continue to learn more about this and see if it would ever be an advantage for you.
Thanks, Tom. Well, Marley, why don't you wrap us up?
Sounds good. Thank you. So this concludes today's webinar, Captive Strong, How Best-in-Class Companies Are Growing Their Business. Gold sponsored by Cottingham & Butler, Inc., and brought to you by the Truckload Carriers Association. Special thanks to Mark Fitzgerald, Dave Franson, Carl Bumgarner, and Tom Kressinger, Jr. Please visit events at truckload.org to find out more about our 2014 Refrigerated Division Annual Meeting set to take place July 9th through 11th.